Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. In this episode, we're talking about roaster and coffee discoverability. I think we've all been there where we want to try something new. We want to brew something different at home, but you always run the risk of, man, if I buy a few bags, spend $20, $30, $40, $50, am I going to actually like this? And so in this episode, Sergi and I share a few ways that we've been able to kind of vet roasters or vet the coffee that we're planning to buy to increase our chances of it actually tasting really good and for us enjoying it. So I think you'll find some very practical tips in here. Hope you enjoy this podcast. Let's get into this. My name is Mark Kotrovsky. I'm here with Sergi Kotrovsky, two hosts of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. A little bit of a different setup today. Sergi's on the road, so we're taking this online through Riverside, but without changing our classic traditions. I don't know, Sergi, did you brew something up or what?
I sure brewed something up. It might be relevant to our topic today, so we'll see. You'll have to go first because is that a batch or is that a pour over?
I just did a pour over because
okay. I stuck with the tradition. Brother. Nice. I went with a batch brew.
Just brewing some of our Gosca Brothers, the very light roast, the even lighter, as we called it.
Nice.
It's this has been my pretty much my daily drinker for the last couple weeks.
I love
hitting
that.
The spot. I'm pleased.
You gave me some of that sample that, or not a sample, but you gave me some of that coffee. I didn't pick up much, but I haven't brewed it yet. I mean, you called me out last time we were talking coffee at the house, and you're like, dude, why are you storing it in the Atmos container? And that could be a problem and why my coffees taste always too fresh. Maybe the Atmos container isn't the best way. I don't know. That's just up for debate. We've already had this on the podcast before, so who knows? I am drinking. This is the thing, Mark. I might ruin our perception of coffee in general for listeners and you. I'm actually drinking a coffee with flavor notes of heavy cream and flavor notes of some sugar. A nice old medium roast that I drank a cup black. That had very caramelized flavors on it and had probably a strong chocolatey note in it, almost no acidity. So I decided for my second cup to give me just the pleasure of slightly more diner-esque coffee. Did I just lose all of the audience's trust in my flavor preferences just because I'm enjoying a second cup of properly well developed medium roast with sugar and cream?
You might have derailed the podcast for this episode because that is I guess it just depends on
But
do you enjoy it? How would you find something like this? If this is what you like, where would you go? What would you do?
That's a good question. That's where I was getting at. Like, what do you do? Do you just not drink coffee if you don't have access to some ultralight, September coffee, or what do you do? Like, what happens at that point? Do you just stick with caffeine deprivation and stick with no coffee at all, or do you go in for some medium roast with cream and sugar?
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely think that it's always worth the shot, especially since it's occasionally. Go to your diner, go drink some diner coffee, or go to your mom and pop breakfast joint down the street. Go drink some dark roast. You won't die. You won't melt.
No. That's another thing.
And then maybe,
at what point
come home and
should we do a podcast
brew that
episode
geisha.
on? Exactly. Yeah. At some point, I'm like, man, do we need a podcast on like reviewing diner coffee? Like, go through like 5 diners in Bellingham and Not
Oh, that'd be
like those
fun.
fancy
That's a great
restaurants that
idea.
serve specialty coffee. I'm talking about like
That would be fun.
traditional diners. And maybe dude, that would be a fun podcast.
I'm biased, but I really want the Horseshoe Cafe to win.
Dude, same.
That's all.
I've had pots after pots of coffee there.
I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for you, Horseshoe, but I think you'll let me down. But I'm rooting for you. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, this episode is a real one because it's something I've been thinking about. Like, just trying to find, if you're drinking coffee at home and you're trying to find a roaster and coffees to try that you haven't tried before, and that not all of Reddit is screaming about, which is like, I don't know, the 4 or 5 roasters that everybody keeps repeating on Reddit. It's kind of challenging to find what your fits your flavor preference without running the risk of like, man, am I really gonna like this? Am I gonna drop like $20, $25, $30 on a bag that I'm just gonna be like, this is going into the grinder seasoning pile,
Right.
And in general, it's actually getting also harder to do this for cafes as well. Before you used to just find a cafe that has I don't know, like an EK43 and some kind of either like a mud bar or like a cool looking strata or something like that, and then you can like assume like, oh cool, like they have like those little things, it's gonna taste good.
They know what they're doing
with some Nordic like styling or the minimalism, and then now over time, like that's becoming not a thing to look for because everybody has it, and so and so that the struggle is real with roasters. I mean, with cafes in general, with all of coffee, but this is like in particular for probably finding more coffee roasters, not necessarily cafes. But it would be interesting also to do one for cafes, and then plus an interesting one to do for importers as well, from like a green sourcing. I don't know. Anyways, this is just me just brainstorming. But anyways, how do you vet a roaster and find something ballparky of what you'll enjoy? So
I think part of it is also there is such a fast-paced growth of you're seeing like new roasters pop up here and there. You're seeing like almost every town has some kind of local roaster. So there's like a lot of growth within, especially specialty coffee. And as the market gets more saturated, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If more people are exposed to specialty coffee and like the third wave style of service in cafes, then it actually is good for everyone involved, all businesses involved. So I don't have a problem with the market being so saturated. I think the challenge then is to find clarity in that market. And that's, I think, a major key is like when we buy coffee, I know when you and I buy coffee, we have a certain preference, and there are certain key things in a bag, on a website, or in a cafe that stick out to us and be like, okay, I may have never tried it, but I'm going to trust that this is going to be in the ballpark of what I like. So we do have those things, but I've also made, I think, a fair amount of mistakes choosing coffee. I do remember vividly buying a bag of coffee that from someone I already had some trust built, and I kind of knew even the roasting machine that they were using. So I was like, oh, this is probably going to be in the ballpark of what I like. And it said that it was light roast. I think the varietal was even a geisha. And honestly, when I got it, super excited, popped into the bag, and it was, I'll be honest, Mark, you probably remember this situation, but it was definitely not a light roast. And that was very challenging because I thought that I was kind of foolproof, but there's sometimes those little caveats where you're like, okay, I think I got all the right pieces together. I think the puzzle's going to like turn out good. And then you realize like, okay, you made a mistake. So it is slightly challenging, but also I think there's a few key things that both you and I would look for in a roaster or even a cafe that is serving coffee. And one of those things, I think predominantly, I'll kick it off with, I think a major thing is looking for that producer that you've already trusted with other roasting companies. If you've like drank Diego Bermuda's coffee and you see a roasting company that serves them or has a Diego's coffees, but you've never had that roasting company before, had coffee from them, then it's almost a safe bet to be like, okay, this might be in the ballpark. I can use this as my maybe introduction to this roasting company, and I'll grab something I'm familiar with, and then from there I can explore the rest of their menu. But I think a lot of the times there's a lot of trust built for coffee companies and coffee brands depending on the producers, because producers sell a lot of coffee to a lot of different roasters. Does that kind of make sense and align with you, Mark?
Yeah, I think at least sourcing from a producer that you're aware of at least gets you, I don't know, just 50% of the way there.
Yeah.
Because, as a roaster, you can't make the coffee any better than what it is off the farm. And so, yeah, if you got that main piece right, you already have a good chunk of the goodness that you're looking for in a coffee already pretty much guaranteed. Now, can a roast really, really, really butcher a really spectacular coffee? Yeah, we've had that for sure. So, but generally speaking, some of the well-known roast producers that we see in some of our favorite roasters, they oftentimes roasters oftentimes will roast it in the ballpark of that specific coffee. I'm not making any sense right now, but anyways, if a roaster, what I've noticed generally is that if a roaster buys a really nice green from Diego, Juan Pena, or something like that,
Yep.
the roasters probably, most of them, like there's like a 80-90% chance hit rate that they're probably going to roast it a specific way.
Right.
Because those kinds of roasters have kind of like generally similar flavor preferences and will gravitate to roasting it in a specific way. Now, that is not a rule of thumb. That is just an observation of what I've noticed from trying, prominent producers and prominent roasters that buy that kind of green. It's not to say that, hey, you can't find a dark roast Juan Pena, but
right, yeah,
holy cow, I would actually be very impressed if you found the dark roast like Juan Pena,
Yeah.
So that's that bridge, that gap, or that connection, that parallel, is definitely something to look out for, hands down.
Yeah, especially because if someone is buying, for example, a COE coffee, they're probably going to aim to roast it and prepare it, if you're in a cafe, in a way that would actually reveal what it means to be a COE coffee, right? Like I don't,
Yes.
when I'm looking at different coffees and I see a familiar producer and the year that they won the COE in that coffee, like I've been listening to podcasts of this year's COE and I'm like, oh, okay, that's good to know that this producer just like crushed it this year. And if I see a bag, I can almost feel as confident as I can get without trying it that this is going to be in the ballpark of what I prefer in a coffee. So the producer does build a lot of trust. The flip side of that is it's not like some producers are just have a lot of hype, not in a bad way, right? It's kind of good. They've just grown to be very popular because they create something really, really good. Not all hype is bad, but I think sometimes around that hype, there can be a little bit of a loss for other producers on a menu that you're looking for a coffee from a new roaster. For example, I think one of the things is like for us, like Jorge Mendez's coffee, he's not this like insanely famous producer, but he's been tried and true. We've carried Jorge's coffees since the very beginning, and folks have fairly enjoyed them. Are they going to be slightly roasted, slightly different? Not to say that they're like an extreme, but they're roasted slightly different than our Wilton coffee or like the very ultralight Gosca Brothers coffee that you're drinking right now. But there's still that trust built with that producer that is very familiar to our menu. So there's a lot at play there when it comes to producers and finding green coffee. And I mean, honestly, it could possibly even be a full podcast episode on talking about that. But I think that the other thing is there are keywords, whether it's like flavor notes, whether it's even roast levels. There are keywords on a website, a bag, or even in a cafe that people are looking for that would describe the preference, whether if you like light roast, medium roast, or dark roast, there are certain things that are aligned there. And the obvious one, again, is if you look at flavor notes and the way flavor notes are described, and I'm not even talking about the actual notes themselves, like not... The one thing is to have flavor notes that are super specific, and I had a chat with someone on Threads about this, is the argument was like, well, there needs to be way more flavor notes on bags than just 3. Why is there only 3? And that's also a big part of the question, because that kind of defines and explains the coffee in itself. And I think when I see a bag or a box of coffee that has descriptors that are a little more on the specific side, I tend to maybe not automatically give them my trust, but it does pique my curiosity. Rather than picking up a bag that says Ethiopian Yirgacheffe has, berry notes, stone fruit, and sweet. Like, you know what I mean? The lack of specificity on that bag sometimes then makes me feel like, oh, is it actually possibly roasted consistently to the degree that I like it to be? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at bags that have very broad general notes. And yeah, sometimes, again, this is actually, I observing a lot of the coffees that I've purchased, I don't think this is a rule of thumb. So folks, this is just conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think you can say, hey, broad flavor notes, that's bad, because like Prodigal, I know sometimes has like pretty broad flavor notes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Man, their coffees are really great, and sometimes they're more specific. So it's a little bit of a challenge to just ballpark it that way. But I think flavor notes are a great. Again, flavor notes are designed not to tell you what you should taste, but to give you a framework for what you should expect to experience out of a coffee.
100%.
And so flavor notes you should be paying attention to flavor notes, and that will guide, in the ballpark. Like if you see, again, not a rule of thumb, but most, like if you see like cacao, smoky, chocolate, like it's probably not going to be something you'll like if you're looking for something light roast, and juicy and light.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, flavor notes are a big deal, but could be slightly misleading as well.
The other side of it is flavor notes aren't like the only thing and not the only descriptor on the bag that kind of builds and gains my trust. The other one is how well do they describe the processing of the actual coffee? Is it just like, wash natural honey, or is there a little more specificity around the processing method? And sometimes is there a additional information on the website or even in person in the cafe that will help me understand what happened to this coffee from like seed to cup? So I'm not going to always say like more information always builds more trust. It's like the quality of information combined with the quantity of information that actually gains my trust and actually holds my trust when it comes to trying something new.
And lastly, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is the huge benefit of multi-roasters, but also like curated subscriptions, which before I was, especially on the curated subscriptions, I was like, I'm struggling to see the value that these subscriptions bring, but I'm starting to see them in a much better light lately, and with especially with like cafes and multi roasters. They're a really awesome way to vet what you're drinking, because if you trust a multi roaster that serves, multiple roasters, and then if you trust like a subscription service that's maybe curated specifically to your flavor experience, you can just, they're doing the hard work of vetting the roaster and vetting the coffees that they put on the shelf. And actually, they're, especially with like a cafe multi roaster, you can walk in and actually ask them questions, because they should know everything about the coffee. They should know what they're serving and can just give you like a very tailored experience to you and say, hey, this coffee won't fit your flavor preference and this coffee does. This roaster you might not have ever seen before, but they're doing a killer job, So you get, like, that is a value that multi-roasters bring, is curated experience, and they're curating the just the roasters. They're finding them. They're doing the hard work, and same with like subscriptions, even if you're not signed up for like a subscription, you can just find a subscription that you really like, and then just look at what they're buying and then go and buy it yourself. That's it, so there, you can let other people do all the hard work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember when in the fairly like early days of when I was getting into specialty coffee, maybe it wasn't that early, but it was. I already knew what I was kind of looking for. I had a preference kind of set, and I remember going to Nemesis back in the day when they did have kind of a multi-roaster model, and I think it was because of Nemesis that I was introduced to tailor-made coffee. Like it was like they had them on the shelves. I already trusted what Nemesis brings to the table. They weren't roasting their own coffee at that point. Their curation and their style and preferences aligned with mine, so it's kind of a safe bet. And then the other one also in Vancouver was like Revolver has done it for such a long time, where even though they offered such a wide scape of coffees, I could be like, okay, maybe not exactly this coffee that I would like, but there's enough options that they've garnered enough trust and held enough trust that I can be like, probably something on their shelves is going to align well with my preferences. So I think that's one thing. But if you're not going into in person, like you said, like subscriptions are also a major thing. And then the other part is just looking at, sometimes I'll do this if I see a new roaster and I'm not sure, I've never had them before, I'll look at the other cafes that have bought and served their coffees. And if I see a cafe, even if I don't know the cafe, I don't quote unquote trust that multi-roaster, but I see that they like, for example, they like Manhattan, DAC, and maybe like, I don't know who else that like around that like area or sphere, or even like September, then I'm like, oh, okay, they kind of like lighter coffees. I could trust them just simply from looking on Instagram, you know what I mean? Not even in person and not even looking at their websites. And a lot of it also has to do with like, yeah, at that point, what I'm actually trusting is quote unquote word of mouth. So it's other people's like opinions of those coffees. So other places like Reddit, like social media, different social media avenues that actually help with building that trust. So yeah, a lot of that actually plays a role in how we decide to buy coffee, how I decide to buy coffee personally. And a lot of that also leads to all roasting companies and coffee brands building a lot of hype. And I don't always trust the hype, but there's this, I would say, like kind of not even a balance, but a tension of knowing that there's a reason why a certain roaster or a certain coffee company has hype. And actually unpacking that reason is what helps me decide whether that's something I would like from a flavor point of view or something I would like just because it's cool. And I think there's value in that. I'm thinking of I listened to a recent podcast, coffee podcast, and they were describing their experience in a cafe that had in a pop-up that was like, it's super famous. It's built by a celebrity. It's like super popular, and you could enjoy it and experience it and like it, and it hits your preference because of the branding, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's quote unquote good coffee or like your favorite cup of coffee. But there's hype around the brand, and separating sometimes the two is helpful, and also finding clarity in why there's the hype is also very, very helpful. So that's kind of like my conclusion when it comes to around all of those things.
Well, folks, that's a little bit about how we choose coffees. Hopefully that helps you, gives you some direction as to how you can find new roasters, new coffees to try, and not be stuck to maybe the kind of the same roasters that you've always been trying, especially since it's fun to experiment, always try new stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, that's kind of like a framework in our approach to certain things that's kind of treated us well, and helped us find great coffees. But friends, thank you so much for listening once again to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. And remember, as we always say, reflect what's good.
Peace.